Today, I want to do a video on one of the most dangerous prisons I ever been to. That's in Terre Haute, Indiana. But before I get to Terre Haute, Indiana, I would like to talk about going to Terre Haute, Indiana, which I was 27 years old. I had just got a life sentence, and one Saturday, a CO came and told me, he said, listen, man, they finna fly you out of here this week to Oklahoma, and then you'll be going to federal prison. I didn't get that much sleep that night, and they took us to Oklahoma. And in Oklahoma, they drove us to El Reno. And while in El Reno, I was there, and I ran into a lot of guys that had been sentenced. And I had ran into a guy named Melvin Butler. He was in El Reno for a while. I ran into him and a bunch of other guys back in 1991. But to get to one of the most violentest prisons I ever been to when I was 27 years old with a life sentence is Terre Haute. The day I arrived there on bus, I didn't really understand where I was at. I had never been to Indiana. I've been to a few other places, but I had never been to Indiana. And while we was on the bus going to Indiana, Terre Haute, USP, one of the most dangerous prisons at the time back in those days. Even the guy on The Wire, that was a guy that was invented the phone system in The Wire, the movie The Wire, he said that Terre Haute was one of the most dangerous prisons because if the European or if the government wanted you dead, they would send you to Terre Haute. And I found out later, years later, that that's what Terre Haute was built on: murder and mayhem, drugs, gangs, and all of those things. And when I got to Terre Haute, we was on the bus, and there was a couple guys that had already been there before, and we landed in front of, we drove in front of the prison, and one guy say, man, this is out here by the Hoosier Dome. But I didn't know what the Hoosier Dome was because the Hoosier Dome was in the movie The Hooters, which is Indiana Hooters. We was that far out in the neck of the woods where a lot of the Europeans be at. And when I first got there, I looked at the front of the prison, and the front of the prison looked like an old castle. And while we was on the bus, shackled, black box, I had a life sentence. I don't know if a lot of people know what the black box is. It's a notorious box that's like a handcuff inside of a handcuff where you can't get to it unless you have a lock and a key afterwards. And while I was in the black box, I got off the bus, and we was shackled feet and hands, and we end up going into the thing called R&D. This is my first time ever experiencing federal prison. I was 27. I had been into some of the most notorious jails in Los Angeles, but I had never been to prison because I'd never been to the state prisons in California. A couple of my brothers have, but I didn't. So when I get to the USP, I was wondering, was I going to die in this prison because I had just had a life sentence? But while in Terre Haute, I was in R&D, and some guys came that was in the upper units, and they was like, man, who down there from LA? Who down there from New York? Because the guys upstairs, they wanted to know all of the guys, a few of the guys, if they have any homies down there. It was something like 4,800. They want to know where you from and what city. So a couple of guys, they always say, is any Crips and Bloods in there? So one of the guys say, man, it's a Crip in there from LA. His name Fish, and he's from East Coast. And another guy that was over in the unit say, yeah, his name's Sleepy from Hoover, Five Deuce. He said, yeah, man, it's a dude in there named, I'm Fish from East Coast, homie, what's up? So immediately he went and spread the word, tell everybody that I was there, and there was a few more Crips. and it was a guy named Creeper from Compton, Mexican gang. It was a few of us on it that I kind of like talked to on the bus, and they was telling me different things about the prison system and stuff. So before I can even get to the compound, a lot of people already knew that I was on my way, or I was up there on my way to the units. So when I got there, they put me in, I think it was F unit. Yeah, because it was down there by D unit, which later on became Death Row. So when I got in the unit, the first guy I seen was a guy named Mad Dog from 9 Deuce Bishop. I ran into a guy named Bill Milky, guy out of Texas named One Punch. I ran into all these guys, and we was talking about how much time I had and how I was going to be able to get the time back or get a sentence back or whatever. But I didn't know that this prison was one of the most notorious prisons for gangs. As I started working my way around the prison, going to child hall, people were showing me what not to do, what to do, and who I would be in the cell with. Guy Calvin Klein was there from New York. Boy George was there from New York. Muchardin was there from Chicago. It was a bunch of Vice Lords, GDs, Crips, Bloods, New York gangs, Young Boys Incorporated, Murder Inc., dudes from Atlanta, ABs. It was a little bit. I thought LA had a lot of gangs, but I didn't know that all around the country they had a lot of gangs until I got to Terre Haute. But Terre Haute was a whole different ball game when I first got there. They had a Unicorp. You either work Unicorp, or you work laundry, or you do a couple other jobs they had there, and they gave the kitchen jobs. So while I was there, I learned how to work my way around a prison, because it was my first time going to federal prison. And while I was there, I started lifting weights. They had a lot of weights. I even ran into my boy from 99 Mafia. I ran into Money Mike. I ran into Dark, that was from GD. I ran into Lex. I ran into a lot of guys that was into the gang culture. So what I started doing, I started learning my way around. I started going around. But I didn't even know that when you're doing time in federal prison or prison period, everybody used to ask me, man, how did it feel to have a life sentence? But I didn't really meet too many guys down there that had life sentences. I think people used to look at me kind of different because they said, man, that guy got a life sentence. And he's a young guy. He just come off the street. He's a Crip. He got busted out of town in Texas. But I didn't understand the value or the felicity of what I was going to be doing, because they had put me in a hole when I first got there because I didn't have my judgment and commitment. So they put me in a hole for about a week. Then when I got my papers, they let me out the hole. That's when I really started knowing what Terre Haute prison was about. First few days I got there, a couple guys got stabbed. A couple guys was, that's when cigarettes was one of the big items back then. There was a lot of guys there that I had heard see from Main Street. But during prison time in a federal prison, you have a lot of guys there that had big names. You had a lot of guys that was doing a lot of time, that did a lot of time, bank robbers, drug dealers. But to talk about Terre Haute, man, was a big thing because I didn't know my future in prison because I had a life sentence. But Terre Haute was one of the first prisons I went to. It was one of the first prisons that I cut my teeth there to even learn about prisons. And Terre Haute is way in Indiana. They didn't have no black radio stations. They didn't have no rap stations, but they just played rap on the weekends in the radio college stations. And that's how I ended up in Terre Haute in 1991, 92. That's when I arrived Terre Haute, Indiana, one of the most ferocious prisons in the United States, Terre Haute, Indiana.